Welcome to some very famous people you've never really heard of. Bite-sized biographies of the famous, the infamous, and the quirky in less than an hour. My name is Philip D. Gibbons, and there is more information about me, this podcast, and a bibliography at someveryfamouspeople.com. There are also photographs of many of the individuals and items mentioned in this podcast. At the conclusion of Part 2 of this presentation, there will be additional suggestions concerning further information about today's subject, the life and works of Dutch master Jan Vermeer. If you have enjoyed this presentation, please like us at our Facebook page, Some Very Famous People, and follow us on Twitter at Philip D. Gibbons. Subscribe to my YouTube page at Noblesse Oblige. Please note that all of Bite-sized biographies are now available on YouTube and YouTube Music. And please tell a friend about Bite-sized biographies. Now let's continue to follow along with Part 2 of our story about Jan Vermeer. Vermeer seems to have explored a particular theme by, in succession, composing pairs of paintings with similar designs and ideas. With Young Woman with a Water Pitcher and Women with a Lute, Vermeer has two figures in a practically identical pose, gazing out of the ever-present window on the left of the painting. Based on the provenance of the two artworks, the former picture became quite familiar, especially in the United States. With her distinctively long cap, serene expression as she opens the window, brightly colored dress, ornate design of the tablecloth, leaded window, and map on the wall, this painting's subject was reproduced and appeared in just about every American art class setting in the 20th century. Even a junior high school student familiar with at least the painting, if not the artist. For many years it was believed to have been composed by Dutch contemporary Gabriel Metsu, but was eventually correctly identified when it was sold by a Parisian art dealer to Henry Marquand. Marquand was a wealthy financier, New Yorker, and one of the original founders of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Scouring Europe to build up inventory for this newly formed art gallery, he was fortunate enough to purchase Young Woman with a Water Pitcher for approximately $800, and Marquand immediately donated it to the Met. Because it was the first Vermeer ever publicly exhibited in the U.S., it became quite famous, and reprints were ubiquitous in just about every academic setting in America. Although practically identical in design, Woman with a Lute does not enjoy the same reputation. The female subject is playing the lute, another larger stringed instrument, on the floor in front of her, the inference that she is gazing out of the window in anticipation of a male caller. But her expression is strange, practically odd and off-putting, and her hair almost frizzy, unkempt even. The painting's ownership was undocumented for many years, possibly the cause of its poor condition, when finally sold to American railroad tycoon and financier Collis P. Huntington. That same year, 1900, Huntington also donated it to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Vermeer continued his pattern of producing a pair of similarly designed paintings in 1662 and 1663 with the Music Lesson and the Concert. The Music Lesson depicts a man and a woman, the woman standing at a wooden keyboard instrument known as a virginal, a kind of harpsichord contained in an ornate rectangular box. The man is to her right, most likely instructing her, the entire large room bathed in sunlight, this time from a bank of several windows on the left, harlequin floors, the usual ornate tablecloth, a large painting, and in this case, the additional optical feat of a mirror above the head of the female, reflecting her likeness. The concert has a similar layout, a large room, two ornately framed paintings, and a trio of a singer and two musicians, a woman at a keyboard, a man sitting playing a stringed instrument, and a woman standing singing from a sheet of music. There are no windows, but light from the left illuminates the scene, the same decorative tablecloth and harlequin floors. In fact, some scholars speculate that the paintings may have been meant as a kind of pendant, two canvases meant to be juxtaposed together, forming a complete scene. Both paintings possess a remarkable provenance, the music lesson eventually a part of one of the most prominent private art collections in the world, the concert suffering a much more ignominious fate. The music lesson was acquired by a Venetian painter and collector, Giovanni Pellegrini. Upon Pellegrini's death, the painting was acquired by Joseph Smith, a British diplomat stationed in Venice, who also was an avid collector as well as an art dealer. In 1762, Smith, who was well connected in British high society, sold his entire collection to King George III, although at that time the music lesson was attributed to another Dutch painter. The painting was exhibited privately, among many other artworks, for George III and subsequent royals at Windsor Castle. Owned personally by the British royal family, it has been shown at the King's Gallery, Buckingham Palace, but typically is not on exhibit, just another item within the royal collection, the largest private art collection in the world. The concert eventually made its way to France and the collection of Torre Berger. Upon his death and the auction of his vast collection in Paris, most of Europe and many American collectors were enthusiastically involved in this disbursement. One of these was the quirky American heiress and Bostonian Isabella Stewart Gardner. Adhering to Victorian custom, she participated in the auction by signaling a male associate with her handkerchief, successfully outbidding several other wealthy American collectors, as well as the Louvre and the British National Gallery. The comparatively high price she paid and her lack of profile in the art world resulted in a sensation that immediately established her as a major player among art connoisseurs. She continued to travel the world, acquiring art from many different cultures, but also adding other valuable works by Rembrandt, Titian, and others. As her legacy, she would leave a museum within an Italianate villa built to house her collection, located in central Boston, Massachusetts. Unfortunately, on March 18, 1990, thieves broke into the Gardner and stole 13 different items, including Vermeer's The Concert, the crown jewel of the collection. None of these artworks have ever been recovered, and this remains the most expensive unsolved art theft in history. For more information on Isabella Stewart Gardner and the art heist at Boston's Gardner Museum, please listen to my May 2nd, 2024 podcast, Volume 6, Episode 12, concerning this incident. In the mid-1760s, Vermeer's deliberate process would deliver 5 paintings: Women in Blue Reading a Letter, Women with a Pearl Necklace, Women with a Balance, A Lady Writing, and Mistress and Maid, all completed between 1663 and 1667. All 5 are similar in design, the main figure to the right in the painting gazing forward to the left of the painting, either through a window or light provided from an unseen window. Of these 5, the most prominent is probably Woman in Blue Reading a Letter. The subject is absolutely entranced by what she is reading, the light either illuminating her or completely dark. A giant map of Holland is attached to the wall behind her, adding a feeling of a larger interior that is not visible. The triangular shape of the woman was thought to be a sign of pregnancy, hence the deep concern of the reader, taking in news from her partner who is traveling. Further analysis indicated that pregnancy would be a taboo subject of Vermeer's time period, and that her appearance was typical based on female garments of the day. The most striking aspect of the painting is the deep blue color of the woman's outer blouse. It underlines that Vermeer only used the finest paints and pigments, in this case a blue derived from the semi-precious stone lapis lazuli. His brilliant coloring was assisted by the spare-no-expense implementation, the effectiveness evident centuries later. This painting remained mostly in Holland until its purchase by one of the wealthiest merchants in the country, Adrian van der Hoop. Upon his death, the paintings were bequeathed to the city of Amsterdam. His mansion was open to the public, and his vast collection of over 250 paintings put on display. When the Rijksmuseum was completed in 1885, the Van der Hoop inventory was incorporated into its permanent collection, including The Woman in Blue Reading a Letter, among its most famous paintings. Women with a Pearl Necklace, notable for its deep bright yellow and white coloring, was part of the Decius collection and eventually was owned by Torre Berger, who sold it to a German businessman and philanthropist, Barthold Swearmont of Aachen, Germany. In 1874, an economic collapse of his business forced Barthold to sell a large portion of his collection, including this Vermeer, to the Gemäldegalerie Stylische Museen zu Berlin, the Berlin State Arts Museum, where it currently resides. Women with a Balance depicts another female weighing gold at a table, lit by a faint sunlight barely streaming through a window. Also a Decius auction piece, it was owned for several years by the King of Bavaria, Maximilian I, who displayed it privately at Munich's Nymphenburg Palace. Upon his death, it was sold to a French nobleman and made its way through various members of the French nobility until purchased at auction in London by Peter Widener, a Philadelphia businessman among the wealthiest Americans in U.S. history. Widener displayed the painting at his home known as Linwood Hall, a 110-room Georgian mansion in the suburbs of Philadelphia. In 1942, his son Joseph donated it and hundreds of other works of art to the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. A Lady Writing and Mistress and Maid depict an almost identical subject clothed in yellow, composing a letter, the latter painting also including a servant. A Lady Writing was owned by a fairly predictable succession of Dutch and French collectors when, in 1907, it was purchased by J.P. Morgan, whose son sold it to Sir Harry Oakes at auction in 1940. Oakes, a wealthy gold mining magnate living in the Bahamas for tax reasons, died there in 1943 in one of the most notorious unsolved murders of the 20th century. In 1946, his widow sold A Lady Writing to a member of the Havemeyer family, wealthy from sugar refining interests. The family also donated the painting to the National Gallery of Art in 1962. Mistress and Maid was the third and last Vermeer, acquired by Henry Clay Frick in 1919, and is also part of the permanent Frick collection. After this sequence of 5 paintings, Vermeer then explored a traditional style of Dutch painting known as a tronie. This design involves an individual's head and upper body, but it is not a portrait and is focused on catching an expression. This approach resulted in what today is Vermeer's most famous and recognizable painting, The Girl with a Pearl Earring. Much smaller than one might perceive from its frequent reproductions, the painting's dimensions are only 17.5 by 15 inches. Still, the yellow and blue coloring and unique mystical expression have earned this picture the nickname the Mona Lisa of the North, and earned it a place among the most esteemed paintings in the art world. This was not always the case. It has no mention in any inventory of Vermeer's work and disappeared until the late 19th century. In 1881, the painting came up for auction in The Hague. It was so dirty and damaged it was difficult to even determine what the subject of the painting was, but 2 expert collectors became interested in the painting as a possible Vermeer. Victor de Stoors was a civil servant and Dutch art expert, and advised his friend Arnold de Toom, an army officer and art collector, that de Toom should buy the canvas on the outside chance that it might be a Vermeer. De Stoors promised not to bid against his acquaintance, and de Toom was able to buy the artwork for 2 guilders and 30 cents, less than $30 in 2025 value. De Toom died in 1902 and willed 12 paintings to the Mauritshuis Museum, The Hague, including The Girl with a Pearl Earring. And it was here that 2 formal cleanings and restorations were quickly performed on the painting, greatly improving its condition and revealing the artist's distinctive signature. The most recent restoration in 1994 focused on the contrast between the black background and the subject, the background technically found to actually be a dark green curtain that faded over time. The 1994 restoration enhanced the expression of the subject and the blue and yellow of the exotic scarf she wears. The pearl, actually too large to be an actual pearl, is most likely tin. And who is this mysterious girl? Despite scholarly and even Hollywood film speculation, her identity remains unknown. She is too young to be Vermeer's wife, and the possibility that it is the artist's 13-year-old daughter has been discredited. Although the Maurits House graciously loaned the painting internationally for many years, in 2014, the museum stated that it would no longer continue this practice. Typically, Vermeer followed up The Girl with a Pearl Earring with another painting in the Trony style. Known as The Study of a Young Woman, the painting is a representation of the face, head, and shoulders of a young girl. In this case, the subject is younger and not as physically beguiling as The Girl with a Pearl Earring, but still a riveting rendition. Acquired by the Belgian noble family known as the House of Arenberg in the early 19th century, it remained in their possession until 1955, when the 10th Duke of Arenberg sold it to the collector and prominent patron of the Metropolitan Museum, Charles Reitzman, for $325,000. Reitzman, a wealthy oil heir from Oklahoma, donated this and many other paintings to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, this particular artwork in 1979. Again, after his diversion into a pair of Tronies, Vermeer created another pair of paintings with an identical female model, unusually clothed with a colorful wardrobe item that dominates the painting. These paintings also coincidentally share the speculation that they were not painted by Vermeer. Girl with a Red Hat and Girl with a Flute have had their attribution questioned well into the 21st century. The remarkably bright red hat of the former painting seems to be what troubled art critics and historians who, in the late 20th century, began to question the authenticity of Girl with a Red Hat. This debate continued until the Washington, D.C.'s National Gallery of Art was able, during the closure of the museum during COVID, extensively examined both paintings with sophisticated technology that virtually penetrated each layer and examined the brushstrokes of both paintings, comparing them to other authenticated works. The verdict? Girl with a Red Hat's brushstroke and technique indicated that it was a genuine Vermeer, while the Girl with a Flute had a different style of paint application, the paint itself a different texture, that might have been completed by someone familiar with Vermeer's process. At best, it was painted by an apprentice or even a student that Vermeer was tutoring. But officially, the National Gallery of Art no longer attributes the painting to Vermeer and has even removed it from public display. Although Girl with a Pearl Earring may be considered as Vermeer's most recognizable painting, and a handful of others enjoy an extremely high profile, there is one painting that Vermeer himself seemed to value above all others. The art of painting, one of the finest examples of Vermeer's expertise, was never sold in his lifetime, despite the probability that it would have generated a considerable amount of money, even by Vermeer's typically modest income standards. Both his wife and mother-in-law went to great lengths to try and exclude it from creditors. The painting features an artist, his back to the viewer, seated at an easel, painting a model who is holding a book and a musical instrument. Vermeer includes all of his usual tricks to provide depth and eye-tricking perspective: a folded curtain and chair in the foreground, a Harlequin-tiled floor, a map at the rear of the studio, and light illuminating the model and left side of the painting. It is suspected that one of the reasons that this painting was so valued was because the seated artist is Vermeer himself. For such a remarkable painting, a remarkable provenance was utterly predictable. At either the Decius auction or a previous auction of Vermeer's possessions, the painting was sold, and either directly or ultimately purchased by a member of the Van Swieten family, either Gerard or Gottfried, his son. Both men were Dutch, as well as members of the Austrian courts of Maria Theresa and Joseph II, Gerard the court physician and librarian, Gottfried a diplomat, politician, and patron of the arts. Gottfried von Swieten died in 1803. His estate sold the painting to the Austrian nobleman Count Rudolf Czernin, a government official and arts patron. The painting remained in the Czernin family's hands until the collapse of the Austrian Empire after World War I imposed economic challenges to the family businesses and holdings. In 1935, Jaromir Chernin attempted to sell the painting to American tycoon Andrew Mellon, but the Austrian government refused to allow the export of such a culturally valuable item. After the annex of Austria, Hermann Goering personally attempted to acquire the painting. Again, this acquisition was successfully stopped by the Austrian government, ruling that the painting was too culturally significant to be sold into private ownership outside of Austria. Most likely, Goering may have stepped aside as Hans Paasi then approached Chernin about buying the picture. Paasi was the personally appointed agent of Adolf Hitler, assigned the task of acquiring the inventory for a spectacular museum that Hitler envisioned building in Linz, Austria, essentially his hometown. This Führer Museum would showcase all of the great artworks of Europe, especially those of any German origin, and the art of painting was high on Hitler's bucket list. Chernin sold the painting to Paasi in 1940 for almost 2 million Reichsmarks, and it was designated for the proposed Linz Museum, winding up among the thousands of looted artworks recovered from the Altaussee, Austria salt mine following the surrender of Nazi Germany. The U.S. returned the painting to the Austrian government. The government then placed it in Vienna's Künstlerisches Museum, Vienna, also known as the Vienna Art History Museum for what it described as safekeeping. The Chernin family would undertake repeated efforts to get the painting returned, either by formal application for restitution and ultimately by lawsuit. As recently as 2009, the Austrian government has rejected any and all such claims, ruling that the family was paid a significant sum of money and was not persecuted in any way. Although the Chernin family was viewed negatively as a result of Jaromir Chernin's attempt to officially join the Nazi Party and perceived collaborative behavior, the Austrian government's attitude is also perceived as disingenuous. The idea that in 1940 any individual would refuse to accommodate Adolf Hitler and not feel pressured is at best convenient. In any case, the public can now access this unique painting at the Vienna Art History Museum, where it was officially added to the permanent collection in 1958. In 1668 and 1669, Vermeer focused on another remarkable pair of paintings known as the Geographer and the Astronomer. The Geographer stands in front of a window, thinking, a map laid out on the table in front of him, his right hand holding a metal navigational divider. Behind him, a globe sits on a large, tall cabinet, a map partially depicted on the wall beneath Vermeer's signature, for once clearly visible on the light-colored blank area of the rear wall. Light streams through several leaded windows, and an ornate cloth adorns the left foreground of the scene. The same male individual appears in the Astronomer, one hand spinning the globe that greatly resembles the globe that appears in the Geographer. The same windows to the left, exact lighting, although a different painting appears in place of the map. These paintings are the classic example of a pendant, a pair of paintings meant to be exhibited together. Initially, they were also auctioned off together and remained together in private hands until the late 18th century. Eventually, they were separated, the Geographer passing through the hands of various collectors and dealers until purchased in 1885 in Vienna and then sold to the Stadel Museum in Frankfurt. The Astronomer would also be sold many times throughout Europe until it was purchased by French financier Alphonse de Rothschild of the Rothschilds' banking dynasty. Upon his death, it would be inherited by his son Edouard. With the invasion of France in 1940, the Nazis quickly focused on several vast collections, including the Rothschilds. Over 3,500 pieces of art were seized from the family estates and confiscated, many designated for the future Führer Museum in Linz. Unfortunately, Hitler was even more obsessed with the Astronomer, and it was shipped directly to Berlin for his personal enjoyment. Eventually, it also made its way to the Altaussee salt mine, where it was recovered by the Allies and returned to the Rothschilds. The family donated the painting to the French state to settle inheritance taxes in 1983. Today it hangs in the Louvre, a stamped swastika still on the reverse of the canvas, a visual reminder of its detour to Germany. Vermeer's smallest painting is also one of his most powerfully recognizable. The Lacemaker, 9.5 by 8 inches, completed in 1670, is a one-time departure into the depiction of a young woman painstakingly working with a needle and thread. Instead of being in profile, she is seated directly in front of the viewer, looking down at her work, dark fabric contrasting her bright yellow and white blouse. Much of the painting is an off-white blank wall, keeping the focus on the painting's subject. The Lacemaker was included in the Decius auction in 1696. It will remain in the Netherlands in the hands of private collectors until purchased in 1870 for 6,000 francs by the Belgian art dealer Leon Gauchet, a prominent figure on the Parisian art scene. By this time period, collectors and art museums were keen on acquiring any authentic Vermeers, and when this painting became available in 1870, Gauchet, intent on turning a quick profit, put it up for auction, and it was purchased by the Louvre for 7,900 francs, about $4,002,025. Although smaller than the wild amounts paid recently for fine art, this price was indicative of the stature of Vermeer at the end of the 19th century, his paintings already among the most expensive available. From 1670 until 1672, Vermeer would focus on the completion of 7 different paintings: The Love Letter, a lady writing a letter to her maid, Allegory of the Catholic Faith, The Guitar Player, and 3 paintings entitled Young Woman at a Virginal. 2 of these paintings would share a bizarre connection many centuries after their composition. On February 23, 1974, an individual who remains officially unknown smashed their way through the steel bars and glass of a ground-floor window of the Kenwood House, a manor house that was bequeathed to the public by its owner, Edward Guinness, 1st Earl of Iveagh. Guinness was the managing director and chief stockholder of the Guinness Brewing Concern and the wealthiest man in Ireland. Upon his death in 1927, Kenwood House and Guinness's art collection became publicly accessible, the collection including Vermeer's Guitar Player that Guinness had purchased in 1919. The thief, or thieves, that broke into Kenwood House took only the Guitar Player and successfully escaped. The painting's frame and broken glass from the frame found about a half-mile away. Subsequent ransom demands did not demand money, but only the release of 2 members of the Irish Republican Army, Dolores and Marion Price, jailed after a 1973 London car bombing. The demand was ignored, and after a tip, the painting was found in a London cemetery wrapped in newspaper, undamaged except for some slight moisture. No one was ever charged in the theft, and the Guitar Player was returned without further incident to Kenwood House, where it remains today. On the 26th of April, 1974, 3 men and a woman broke into Rusborough House, a mansion located in County Wicklow, Ireland. This 200-acre manor home housed the art collection of Sir Alfred Beit, an heir to a South African mining fortune and extensive art collection. At 9 in the evening, the robbers, through a ruse, gained entry into the house. They quickly subdued the servants and Sir Alfred and his wife, and then removed 19 paintings in all, including a Goya and lady writing a letter with her maid. This time, a very explicit ransom note, written on pages ripped from Beit's diary, was delivered, again demanding the release of the Price sisters and about $1.2 million in cash. Because the woman who was involved in the robbery spoke in a French accent, claiming that she was having car trouble in the vicinity, Irish law enforcement scoured the countryside for any suspicious females utilizing such an accent. They quickly located a remote cottage in County Cork in which a woman had used a phony London address while renting the dwelling, speaking in a strange foreign accent. Within 2 weeks, police quickly raided the location, recovered all of the paintings, and arrested the thieves, including one Rose Dugdale, a former debutante from a wealthy British family, an Oxford graduate who became radicalized and personally involved in operations conducted by the IRA. In 1973, she even helped burglarize her family's estate in Devon, England. For her participation in the Rusborough House caper, she received 9 years in prison and served 6. Upon her release, she spent another 25 years involved in IRA activity, mostly constructing sophisticated explosive devices. Rusborough House was robbed again in May of 1986, this time by Martin the General Cahill, an Irish underworld boss who organized the theft of 18 paintings, again including Alfred Beit's only Vermeer. This time it would take over 7 years to recover all but 2 of these paintings in a police sting. By then, Sir Alfred had already donated the Vermeer in absentia to the National Gallery of Ireland in Dublin. Martin Cahill made the mistake of offering some of the stolen paintings to loyalist-connected Northern Irish gang members and was shot to death, most likely by the IRA, although no one was ever charged with the crime. Vermeer's The Love Letter involves a woman and her servant, the woman reacting emotionally to a letter she holds in her hand. The painting illustrates the artist's ability to create a remarkable three-dimensional effect on a flat surface. It remained in private hands in Holland until its eventual purchase by the Rijksmuseum in 1893. A similar painting, entitled Allegory of the Catholic Faith, also involves a single female in the grips of an emotional reaction. This very unusual Vermeer subject, possibly the result of a suggestion by a patron, such religious depictions common in Dutch art, was not part of Odysseus auction and passed through collections in Holland, Austria, Russia, Germany, and back to Holland. However, its Dutch owner was not fond of the painting and eventually unloaded it to a Paris art dealer for a considerable amount of money. In 1928, this gallery then sold it for $300,000, $5.6 million today, to American Michael Friedsam, the president of B. Altman Department Stores. Friedsam gave his entire collection to the Metropolitan Museum upon his death in 1931. The last 3 attributed Vermeer paintings are all entitled Young Woman at a Virginal, a keyboard harpsichord-like instrument. 2 of these were probably painted as a pendant. They feature a single female figure, in one case sitting and the other standing, looking at the viewer. The setting is an ornate room, with one featuring the typical leaded windows, impressively framed paintings adorning the rear wall of the chamber. Fittingly, this pair of paintings is housed together in London's National Gallery of Art. The last painting attributed to Vermeer, also entitled Young Woman Seated at a Virginal, depicts a much larger, less detailed depiction of a female looking at the viewer, hands on a keyboard, costumed in a fashion typical of the painter. The rear wall is completely empty and off-white. This painting had a questionable provenance in the 20th century, when several Vermeer fakes appeared and were actually marketed successfully, in one case even to Reichsmarshal Hermann Goering, by the noted art forger Hans von Meegeren. Sold by Alfred Beit Sr. in the early 20th century, Young Woman Seated at a Virginal's authenticity was examined by Sotheby's in the early 90s. Using some very technical methods, the painting was declared genuine and sold to American casino owner Steve Wynn to be displayed at a gallery in one of his Las Vegas casino properties. Wynn eventually sold the painting to New York-based asset manager Thomas Kaplan, owner of a group of Dutch Golden Age paintings known as the Leiden Collection, that he frequently lends to other art museums, but officially the Vermeer is not displayed publicly. These, then, are the 37 paintings that make up the attributed works of Johannes Jan Vermeer, among the most extraordinary paintings ever created by a human being. Over time, some experts have speculated that Vermeer must have used some kind of mechanical device to project or even trace his designs onto a canvas. Most of this discussion centers around an optical device known as a camera obscura, a portable box with the ability to project a traceable image. But 2 aspects of Vermeer's process indicate that he did not use such a method. The first is that in Delft, there is no record of such a device being available. Only one such instrument was discussed during this time period, owned in The Hague by a wealthy inventor, another barrier to Vermeer working with such a device based on its cost alone. The settings that required Vermeer to comprise paintings involving a 3-dimensional quality that included harlequin floors also could not have been the result of stenciled projection, as very few homes even had marble floors of this type, and only in an entrance or foyer, not in a living space, and certainly not in any of the modest homes that Vermeer lived in. Having accomplished such a level of artistic craftsmanship without utilizing such external assistance makes Vermeer's body of work even more remarkable. In early 2023, the Rijksmuseum announced a 4-month exhibit of 28 works by the artist, the most ever assembled in one place, including The Girl with a Pearl Earring on a special 6-week loan from the Maurits House. Over 600,000 tickets were sold in 2 days, an unprecedented demand for such an art exhibit. Visitors from 113 countries eventually accessed the exhibition, such enthusiasm indicative of the unique appeal Vermeer's art generates. Like much about the artist, we will never learn everything about his life or what his exact artistic process was. Regardless, over 3 centuries later, his small but astonishing catalog still leaves an unforgettable impression. Thank you for listening to part 2 of this podcast about Jan Vermeer. Information for this podcast came from the books Vermeer by Roberta Diatta and Vermeer, The Complete Paintings by Walter Liedtke. There are also additional photographs, bibliographical, and musical information at someveryfamouspeople.com. Thank you for listening, and please tell a friend about bite-sized biographies.